voices rise. Richie and John, we're here to surprise. Freedom and pride, we're living out loud, celebrating our community with a vibrant crowd. Freedom and equality, let it be clear. Being who you are, a fun, frisky, and out loud queer. From mutual broadcasting, we're breaking free. Living our truth, just you listen and see.
From the Mutual Broadcasting System, this is the voice of LGBTQ plus news and life-focused content. The Richie and John podcast. No bullshit, just reality for the community and allies around the globe. Here are your hosts, infinitely wiser, smarter and kinder than everyone in the Trump administration. Combined. Definitely uncensored, even if they are not uncut. Richie Roy and John McMullen. Give 'em hell, boys.
Hello, and welcome back to Richie and John. We had a brief hiatus just because we were busy. Honestly, there was a lot going on. I had some work stuff that came up that had me out of range, as they say. And John was busy too, getting the HQ up and running, making sure everything was fully intact, including air conditioning, which in Palm Springs is a consideration.
It's critical when you're in the triple digits.
It is. And so we are back. And it's a good time to be back because there is a lot going on. First of all, we are coming to you on Newsday Tuesday, right after the big Pride weekend. Many cities across the U.S. had Pride. Places like, I believe, San Francisco and New York and I think Chicago. Seattle. So this is a big one. Lots of prides going on. And, you know, because it's the end of Pride month. Not to say it's the end of Pride season, because good Lord, it goes until goddamn November these days. But it is the end of Pride month. And so, we have some stories to talk about that have to do with Pride. We also had the end of the Supreme Court term. And the drama queen dickheads that they are, they saved a bunch of crap for the last day. They always do. So we'll cover that. And we have a bunch of other stuff too. There's a lot going on in our community, things that affect us. There's lots of other stuff going on. I mean, too much going on, to be honest. It was actually nice to be in Seattle, which I'd not really been to. I was busy with work stuff, with conferences, and with meals, and I didn't really look at the news at all. Was kind of on airplane mode. And then when I got back, I turned airplane mode off, and I was like, yeah, let's put that back on. So in any case, John, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. It's been a very busy couple of weeks getting settled into new digs, and I am happy to be getting things going again. Looking at the pile of news that has amassed since we were last with you, it feels like maybe we should go back to doing shows, I don't know, twice a day, every day.
Right. We can totally do it.
We're not going to be able to do that,
No.
But I got to tell you, news is moving at the speed of light. And as you put yourself on airplane mode, so to speak, in a way, I've done the same thing because I've really taken to heart the news diet that we've talked about with everybody for the last few months. And, I have really cut back on how much news I expose myself to. I mean, I see headlines popping up here and there, but I don't run to the latest breaking news every moment that something happens anymore. And I've gone from probably paying attention to the news about 10 to 12 hours a day to paying attention about 4.5 hours a week, which is a huge cutback. And even at that, it makes me nauseous. So we are going to try and catch up on a number of things on this episode, and maybe spend a little less time on some stories and more time on others. But Richie, I'm going to let you lead the escapade.
I will. Actually, because we have a bunch of stories planned. There's one story that I wanted to touch on briefly that that was not on our list because it's actually, I think, a pretty interesting, and we'll just touch on it briefly, which is the New York City mayoral primary just happened, and it was really interesting. So the winner was Zoran Mamdani, who is someone who was at some point, kind of recently, fairly low in the ranks and had a sort of meteoric rise and is a socialist, is a democratic socialist. And it's been an interesting thing to see in New York because, first of all, Zoran Mamdani is very pro-LGBTQ rights and pro-trans affirming care. And it was just an interesting thing because New York has this kind of long history of really strange, or New York City, strange leaders. Eric Adams is a weirdo.
Is he also the first Muslim American to be elected to New York City's mayoral position?
Well, he's not elected. He won the Democratic primary.
Yeah, right.
So perhaps will be.
Right.
But yeah, that is correct. That is a thing. But yeah, because we had Eric Adams, who is an abject weirdo. And
not to mention a felon. And
correct.
Yeah.
And then, and we had Bloomberg, who actually I think in many ways was a very good mayor, but also weird. There's always things where, you come across like the mayor who like eats pizza with like a slice with like fork and knife or something. There's always some weird thing. But we had in this race, it was like Cuomo was back. Cuomo was running for the Democratic primary. We had a bunch of people running for it.
That was the weirdest thing of all, considering the footnote that he went out on as governor.
Oh, yeah. He basically, I think he was in this weird way running a Republican playbook, being like, oh, well, now's the moment where it doesn't matter that I was like kind of a like total creep.
If you're a crook, yeah.
And a crook and a creep. Like, oh, but now it doesn't matter. So I'm going to sail into the mayoralty. Well, didn't happen. So kind of a cool moment. But anyway, I just kind of wanted to briefly mention that happened. Read up on Zoran Mamdani. I think that this could be an interesting thing to think about as we move through Trump world and think about what it looks like to live in cities and live in places where resistance matters. So I think that's a fun thing to think about. But going back to Pride and going back to the stories that we actually were supposed to talk about, the first story is a Pride story, and it is not on our shores, and it is a very good story. Hungary, whose leader, Viktor Orban, is an autocrat and not a fan of our community at all. And actually, in many ways, Hungary is kind of the playbook that Project 2025 and the right is looking to in terms of what to do in our country. So Viktor Orban's Hungary is a place that is not friendly to us. And in fact, they have enacted sort of bans on promoting LGBTQ lifestyles.
Anything. That
backfired big time this weekend. Over 100,000 people marched through Bucharest, far more than ever have taken part in Pride. Viktor Orban warned people to stay away from the banned parade, threatening clear legal consequences for anyone taking part. But people...
You got a big middle finger.
That was a big fucking middle finger. If you look at the pictures, it is the city is flooded. And what was usually in past years a low-key event attended by a few thousand LGBTQ activists and their friends turned into a mass rally of over 100,000 people, generally saying fuck you to Mr. Orban's government. There was a quote in the New York Times from Edith Roxa, who is 46. What is most painful for me is to see how stupid they think we all are. Edith, a special education teacher who traveled from southern Hungary to take part in the march for the first time, said she was outraged by Orban's claims that the event had been banned to protect children from, quote, homosexual propaganda. She added that ban was, quote, a distraction from all the stealing and other real problems we have in this country. So I think this is a very cool story that in the face of autocracy in a country that is sort of the model, the tide pool that the fever right is looking to turn the U.S. into, people were not having it. And Pride became a protest, a broad protest. I was really psyched about this.
Yeah, I think that if we were to experience having that level of trouble from our government here, and I see it in the future for sure with the direction that they've gone on so many other things, that I think it would go over like a fart in church here too.
Yep. No, so that was a good story. I mean, a flip side little story. Again, this is not in our script, but it just is something we've talked about before, and I wanted to follow up on that the Navy did under Hegseth's stupid regime officially rename the Harvey Milk after someone who like got blown up or something. It doesn't matter, but. Unfortunately, we do not have a.
I thought it was named after a guy who sucked him off while he was in
the USS Glory Hole. Yeah, I know, right? I know. Sadly, no. But so again, we're kind of like that. We're living in our own little autocratic regime where they are erasing people like Harvey Milk and Harriet Tubman. And all kinds of names from this, from ships and from websites. But it's nice to see in Hungary that they're standing up. We did have a ton of stuff coming out of the Supreme Court. Okay, take that back. I was saying none of it good. Actually, one of it good. And this surprised the hell out of me. This one. So I'm going to start with this one. I'm going to move things around a little bit because this surprised me. I was ready to take take a mortgage out of my house to pay for PrEP. Because under the Affordable Care Act, PrEP is mandated to be no cost. You get PrEP for free. That's how it works under the Affordable Care Act because of some Biden era regulations. This was thrown up to the Supreme Court as being, sort of violative of, sort of various authorizations, that it was outside of the authority of the regulation to mandate this. The Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of what is called the United States Preventive Services Task Force and their membership structure and its recommendations for preventive services made after the passage of the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, in March 2010. These services include things like breast cancer screenings, depression screenings, Hep B and C, and other STI counseling and screenings, and PrEP medication, which must be covered by nearly all private insurance plans at no cost to enrollees. This decision overturns a portion of the Fifth Circuit's ruling that went in the other direction. And so as of now, we still have free PrEP for people who are on insurance. This is a big deal. Huge deal. I was expecting the Supreme Court to find a way to strike this down. Honestly, this Supreme Court, I was waiting for them to say like, you know what, cancer screenings, you're on your own. PrEP, good fucking luck. But no, we still have it. And this is a win. This is a huge win for us.
It is.
And just as a brief aside, if you are listening to this show and you happen to be someone who engages in, I think, probably sex at all, you should probably be on PrEP. And there are a lot of ways to get it. And you can get it for free. We've talked before about Mr.com. That's how I get my PrEP and my DoxyPep for free at home. And you can get it from your doctor. There are other providers, but I think it's QCare is another one. But look into it. There's also, there's been a lot of testing. There's now the 6-month shot that you can get, which is you can go to your doctor every 6 months and get a PrEP shot and you're good to go. So while we have it, enjoy it.
For sure.
And then we have a couple other Supreme Court rulings that are not as rosy. And one that actually, I think, really has the potential to make public education, public K through 12 education, almost impossible. So parents with religious objections to storybooks with LGBTQ themes are allowed now, under the Supreme Court's ruling, to withdraw their children from public schools when those books are being discussed. So this case was brought by Maryland parents who objected to books with gay and transgender characters. To be clear, these books were not books telling kids to be gay or telling kids about gay sex. These were books that were teaching language arts that had characters in them that were gay. Justice Samuel Alito, someone who, if there's a wood chipper nearby, who should probably, wear some platform heels and tumble into it, closely analyze the messages that the books conveyed, which is not really the point, and reproduce color images from them in an appendix to his opinion, noting, with alacrity that they were written for young readers. God forbid that those books show the fact that queer people exist. Again, not about gay sex, not telling kids to be gay, just telling them they're ABCs that happen to have gay people in the background. And the thing that's really troubling about this one is that the logic of this opinion, of course, 6-3, all the assholes on one side, our 3 stalwart folks on the other side, sweeps broadly and allows parents with religious objections to demand that their children not be instructed about gay and transgender themes, but also other topics. And so how do you actually do public education when parents can opt out of almost anything for ostensible religious reasons? I mean, whether it's, I guess a gay character. I remember when I was in school, this is a long time ago, just as an aside, I'm not as young as I look. At that point, it was about witchcraft. There was a book, a language arts book, that had some stories that some parents thought were satanic. And because this ruling had not been sort of come down from the court, the school could say, we don't care. But now, parents, if they think that a story is satanic or they think that it is not within their religious teaching, whether it's LGBTQ or whatever, it makes it so that basically all of K through 12 education is subject to this kind of like open kimono parental input. I don't know how you teach that way. And I don't think the Supreme Court cares, because also at the end of the day, conservatives don't even like public education. They don't want it. So if you make it so miserable to be a teacher where you can't teach kids anything and you can't have any themes in it, you can't talk about black people or gay people or whatever. You probably can't even talk about women. You can talk about like some like white boy. Other than that, you're screwed.
Right.
And so, at some point, it's going to make it so miserable that teachers are just not going to want to do it. And that's fine, too, because they don't care. Because if public schools go away, they like that.
Yep.
So anyway.
It reduces their tax bill.
It reduces their tax bill, and it makes people stupider, which makes them more likely to put on that stupid red hat. So win-win for them. Yep. So tell us about the next Supreme Court ruling that came down about gender-affirming care.
In a troubling ruling, the Supreme Court has upheld Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming health care for transgender youth, making a significant setback for bodily autonomy. The decision was in United States versus Crometti, and it passed along partisan lines, of course, allowing 25 states with similar bans to continue enforcing discriminatory practices against trans individuals. Justice Thomas, Clarence, Uncle Tom, along with other conservatives on the court, argued that the ban does not discriminate based on sex or transgender status, dismissing claims of violation of the Equal Protection Clause. The ruling follows a broader trend since the 2022 Dobbs decision, which undermined reproductive rights and left states to regulate health care for marginalized communities. Critics argue that this is part of a larger agenda rooted in white Christian nationalism aimed at controlling the bodies and rights of individuals outside their defined norms. Advocates emphasize the urgent need to protect and restore the rights of LGBTQ plus individuals and reproductive autonomies in America. But writing for the conservative court's supermajority, Chief Justice John Roberts rejected that argument entirely. He said that laws like Tennessee's that turn on age or medical use are not subject to the kind of heightened legal scrutiny that courts used to look at workplace sex discrimination, as one example. Instead, the court applied the lowest level of legal scrutiny called rational basis, meaning that if there is any rational justification for the law, it passes constitutional muster.
Yeah. So the thing here is, this is again, this is not a surprising outcome from this court, but it really does sort of highlight the fact that the court is just chipping away in all ways at sort of autonomy in a way that it's not surprising, but it's really troubling. This court it's very surprising in a way to me that Roberts, because Roberts wrote this opinion. Roberts is someone who, generally the Chief Justice is someone who is supposed to have in mind the institution and how people trust or don't trust the institution. And famously, whether it's the Warren Court or the Berger Court or whatever court, they're really paying attention to the fact that if they go too far over their skis, people will just lose faith in this institution. Because again, famously,
maybe he felt safe about where we're at right now because he knows that the public, by and large, has completely lost faith in the Supreme Court. So it was like, fuck
who
it,
gives a
I'll
fuck,
just go
right?
for it.
Yeah, maybe so. Because he has let this happen on his watch, and he is the one who I think will really be, in the history books, be the person who will be blamed for, I think, the ultimate kind of dereliction of duty of the Supreme Court. Because we had one case it's not a story that we're going to cover because it's not gay related necessarily, but there was the big one. The big one was striking down federal court judges' ability to do nationwide injunctions. This was the case that had to do with birthright citizenship. And while the court didn't say that birthright citizenship was not correct, that wasn't what they were supposed to talk about. In that case was brought up on that premise, but it was about injunctions. And what the court said is that federal judges can't really do nationwide injunctions anymore, which is how in the Trump era, the judiciary has actually been the only check on this autocratic government, because the legislature is asleep at the switch because it's run by Republicans and they're afraid of him. And whether or not they think what he is doing is good, which some of them do, and I don't think all of them do. I think some of them are probably thinking a lot of his stuff is pretty stupid and pretty bad and bad for their constituents. But regardless, they're scared of him. So the legislature isn't going to do a thing. The judiciary has looked at the executive orders and the actions and said, these are clearly unconstitutional, clearly an abridgment of all kinds of constitutional norms, and we're stopping them nationwide while we finish the litigation. Because litigation, especially federal litigation, can take a long time. The Supreme Court cut that out this week. They cut that off at the knees and said no nationwide injunctions anymore. So all the things that we have seen since January 20th, where this administration does something clearly illegal and a court stops it temporarily while it hears the merits, that's not happening anymore. So that this government can do whatever fucking thing it wants, clearly illegal thing. And unless you're a named plaintiff, the injunction, the TRO, does not include you. And what they said in that opinion was, okay, if you want to be part of it, do class actions, which is a very stupid thing to say if you know anything about bringing a class action suit. Because I know a little bit about class action suits because I'm a lawyer who has worked on class action suits. They are extremely complicated. They're very expensive. They are very time consuming. They take forever. And
that's what they want.
So, right. And so to say that is a reasonable choice is like, oh, if you don't want to get deported, even though you're a U.S. citizen, because this government thinks that you should just get thrown into a prison in Honduras, join a class action suit. It's so stupid. And that, I mean, the slide into an autocratic, Gilead style government is on the backs of the Roberts court. So again, history is not going to look very favorably at Roberts. And, another, Supreme Court case that I didn't put in the story list, but we have to talk about briefly. And I'm sorry for being a Supreme Court nerd right now, but it's really important stuff, is a case that is of major import to a lot of friends of ours and probably almost everyone who listens to this podcast. So the Free Speech Coalition versus Paxton case went to the Supreme Court, and this is about Texas had a law that required age verification to access adult websites, i.e. pornography. And there are a bunch of states that have passed these age verification laws under various pretenses, and the Supreme Court upheld Texas's law. And so as of now, states and perhaps the federal government can mandate age verification on websites that have over 1/3 of their content that is adult content. And this is actually sort of a major departure from First Amendment jurisprudence, because it puts sort of fetters on free expression of individuals. And, I think I would love for us to get someone from Free Speech Coalition to come on and talk about this. But in short, what this means is that if you're in a state, and there are, I think, 25 states that have this, it is legal for them to ban you from accessing a pornographic website unless that site has in place a procedure where you can upload your driver's license or some other form of ID and verify that you are over 18. What this does is, in practicality, what it is it chills speech, because I don't know about you, but I am generally pretty wary of giving a lot of personal information to a website. For instance, my driver's license. And so and the thing, and people are like, oh, well, it's to protect kids. That's a canard. And the thing is, what this does is this also opens the door to, if a state were to, let's say, consider, because this all has to do with things like obscenity. Obscene websites have to have age verification, and there's kind of all this language floating around. There's a way in which Tennessee or Texas or Florida could say that if you are a website that is talking about LGBTQ issues, that you need age verification because it is sensitive. And so this is the Supreme Court decision is opening the door to the First Amendment being foreclosed, in many respects by these restrictions. And we've seen them try this before, with drag bans, But now there's totally a way in which in a year, Arkansas or Alabama could say accessing websites promoting homosexuality is obscenity and requires age verification. So it doesn't just harm people who like to look at porn, which is like lots of people like me and you and probably everyone listening to this, but it also really opens the door to all kinds of intrusion by states into what you can look at on the internet. It's a big deal.
Honestly, I don't think you really want to hear how I really feel about this, because I say let it happen. Let them shut it down. Mm-hmm. Because, and it's not for the reasons that I think that stuff shouldn't be available at all. I just don't think that the majority of American people, most of whom I would deem, and I'm sorry if you fall into this group, I'm saying this to our audience at large, but most Americans are stupid. They're fucking stupid. And they didn't want to believe what all the stuff that we talked about Project 2025 before the election and all the various things that we've seen coming down the pike. Oh, you're playing Chicken Little. The sky is not going to fall. Mm-hmm. And guess what? It's falling, and it is encroaching your space and your life, but you didn't take it seriously enough before the election, or you still voted for the orange fool, thinking he can't do all that. He won't do that. He didn't do it in his last term. Well, sometimes you have to lose stuff to really wake people up. And I don't think people are going to wake up until it really comes crashing in on their lifestyle and they start seeing themselves, they could be a U.S. citizen and still be sent on an airplane to El Salvador and end up in a prison where they're going to have no chance of coming out alive. That's happening to U.S. citizens right now.
Yeah.
And it's not just people from some other country who walked across our border and came and never went home. So, if that's what has to happen to wake America up and to stand up and to say, F you, we're not putting up with this anymore. You're not going to encroach on our lives. I'm not an activist. I'm not one of those people. I'm not going to be a crybaby. I'm just going to live with it. I grew up at the end of the Soviet communist era, and I remember having teachers who preached that, God, you should be, kissing the ground that you walk on because you don't live over there and you aren't subject to what those people are going through. Well, guess what? That's where we're headed right now, in the 21st century. Unfreaking real. And so it's not that I want to see people have their ability to look at what they want or to be able to get the information that they not only want, but in some cases is life-saving. I will never forget. I was in San Francisco with my first online radio venture that was an LGBTQ one that was tied into then at the time Planet Out. And I remember getting a letter one night from a kid in Denver, Colorado, who was 14 years old and thanked us profusely for the information being there because he was ready to take his life. He didn't think that people could go on and be successful in life and have the ability to live openly as an LGBTQ person. And it was at a time when we weren't sure if we were going to be able to continue operating. And I looked at my partner and I looked at my business partners and I was like, when you get a letter like that from somebody whose life, you not only give them the hope that there is a future, but you save them from taking their life, it changes your life. And you realize how incredibly important it is that we fight these fights to keep these things available to us without getting our hands munched by, Uncle Sam. And as far as I'm concerned, I agree with you, Richie. We need to bring some people on. I'd like to reach out to the Electronic Frontier Foundation and talk with them about this as well. It drives me nuts. I don't know, what do we have to do? I know we're making progress. You look at the No King's Day events that happened across America, and you look and you see people of all age, race, gender, demographics, and it's like there is America showing up in big town and small, saying, we've had enough of this nonsense, but we've got to really do something. Honestly, I know that this sounds ridiculous, but I'd love to see us have a national referendum. We don't have national referendums, but I would love to see us have a national popular vote referendum to put every mega supporter and politician to death for treason. Because right now, I think it would win.
Well, because I hear what you're saying in terms of this particular case about the age verification being like, what, if people suddenly can't access porn, what, maybe that's a wake-up call. There are lots of wake-up calls happening in Nebraska. There are farmers who are losing millions of dollars because, first of all, no one will come pick the crops because they're scared. And second of all, their largest export partners were China and Canada for things like soybeans. And they're saying, we don't want your fucking soybeans. And so they have soybeans rotting in the field with no one who even wants to buy them, even if someone would pick them, which no one will. And you see videos on TikTok and on Facebook and on Instagram and on Twitter of farmers who are MAGAs who are saying that this is not what we voted for. because what they actually voted for was to just immiserate black people and trans people. They didn't think it would come for them because they're not empathetic, and they're also not thinking smart enough to think even one step ahead, being like, wait a second, my entire livelihood is based on immigration. But they didn't think that anyway. So you're right.
Well, as you well know,
right.
As you well know, I live within walking distance of one of America's biggest, vegetable baskets. Mm-hmm. And so I live very close to one of those problem areas where we're going to have an issue with the migrant farm workers who pick a lot of the things that come out of the ground for people to eat and to survive on in this country. And it's why I was talking a year and 2 years ago about the fact that you bring back in this kind of politics into our system, and what you're going to do is you're going to have yourself a $75 Caesar salad at Burger King.
And here's the thing that I thought about a while back, and we didn't talk about it on the show because it didn't really come up, but I've been thinking about this for a while because it's about slow motion disasters. And the slow motion disaster that you should read about is actually because for all of their talk about being conservative and being anti-communist, the way that Trump is running his autocratic little regime is actually pretty darn heavy-handed. And what you should look at is the story of the Great Leap Forward. If you haven't read about the Great Leap Forward, read about the Great Leap Forward, because that was in China an idea about centralizing agriculture and all kinds of things like getting rid of individual kitchens to have communal kitchens and all this stuff. But it was people who were not experts in agriculture making command and control decisions at a national level. And what ended up was extreme famine. And that doesn't happen overnight. This happened over a course of probably a year because the edicts came down and then slowly the results came in. And what we're going to see is exactly this. We're going to see Stephen Miller's like xenophobic, fascist, fucking, Nazi ICE regime with Tom Homan at its helm, who is one of the most vile humans that walks this earth. If you ever heard a press conference with him, he is just bone chilling. The fact that he was ICE under Obama actually really scares me. The fact that he was there at that time, I'm like, how did this guy? Anyway, Great Leap Forward. Look into it because that's where we're headed. It's a slow motion train wreck in all industries, from agriculture to steel to digital to everything else. It is going to slowly grind to a halt. And like you said, eventually each MAGA person is so unimaginative that they will need to feel the pain them actual selves. They will need to have their mortgage interest rate spike if they're on a variable rate thing. They're going to have their job lost because people aren't working there anymore. And then you're right, maybe that will trigger some changes. There's a quote that is attributed to Sun Tzu, and I feel like we're in this moment. An evil man will burn his own nation to the ground to rule over the ashes. And that, my friends, feels very on point. Yeah, because totally. What is happening is exactly that right now. You look even like little things. Trump, laying siege to LA with National Guard troops, right? And the military. That's unprecedented and bad. The story behind that is they pulled National Guard troops off of fire watch in California, off of doing fire duty where active fires are happening this time of year, as they always do in California, to sit in LA and do nothing. Literal ashes.
It's infuriating.
It is infuriating. So we'll get on to the other stories. So I will apologize in advance to those listening to this episode. We have been off for a bit. So John and I have a lot of catching up to do. We've got at least I have a lot of steam that has been building up. So apologies, but I think it is
to release it,
It's But to go back to a good story, a fun story, or at least a story of courage, Democratic senators hosted a Pride concert at Washington's Kennedy Center. calling it an act of guerrilla theater in protest of the administration's recent cuts to LGBTQ programming. The Kennedy Center famously hosts lots of amazing events, like the Kennedy Center Honors that under non-Trump presidents host beautiful things like honoring Carole King or Aretha Franklin or amazing artists, in the arts and letters and beautiful moments. Trump is not interested in any of that, of course.
And
Kid Rock will probably get, the fucking Medal of Honor or something. And the Kennedy Center, he not really legally, but no one's stopping him, kind of disbanded the board and has put new people on the board. A lot of the acts that were going to be performing there correctly have pulled out because they're like, never mind, we don't want to be part of this Kennedy Center. So the Kennedy Center is losing donors. It's failing now because Trump is being a shithead.
And he has it being run by a guy who used to be one of my neighbors here in the Coachella Valley.
Who?
Richard Grinnell.
Richard Grinnell was one of your neighbors?
Yeah, he lived here in the Palm Springs area.
Oh, and he's a piece of work.
He is a motherfucker.
Talk about, so back in the day, my best friend Courtney and I used to use the term Vichy gays, which were gays that were kind of, either Republican or just kind of aligned with, that sort of bourgeois capitalist kind of vibe. We've got some Vichy gays, and Grinnell is a Vichy gay ne plus ultra because, he's like a token gay, but has been sent harassing letters to people on the Kennedy Center letterhead being like, well, why aren't you performing here? Like, do you have a problem with Republicans? Like, anyway, fuck him. So anyway, so senators including Elizabeth Warren, Tammy Baldwin, and John Hickenlooper organized the event on June 23rd, which featured performances by the DC Gay Men's Chorus, some Broadway stars, and of course, inimitable and wonderful playwright Harvey Fierstein. Fierstein previously accused the Kennedy Center of banning his shows because they include drag performers. Again, interim Kennedy Center head Richard Grinnell rejects the claims, calling the event a political stunt. But senators say the concert is about visibility, inclusion, and resilience. Baldwin states clearly, all LGBTQ people, we see and celebrate you. Warren says that they are responding to intolerance with joy. Since the administration took control, the Kennedy Center has canceled several LGBTQ-themed events. Senators say their performance sends a clear message. They are not backing down from supporting LGBTQ rights and artistic freedom.
I want to invite Harvey to come on the show. He's an old friend from my serious days. He was the guy that I hired to be our voice of God on the station. So he did all the station identifications and a bunch of the intros to various shows and things like that. And he's just such an amazing human being, and he is an unapologetic queer liberal everything. He is not afraid to tell you exactly where you stand with him.
Yeah. So I'm glad they did that. It's important to take any stand you can at this point. And again, I think right now the federal legislature under Republicans is not doing its job. It's not using its power at all. Having individual members of the legislature use their power to either make a stand or at least make a point is important. We've seen instances where members of the Senate or the House of Representatives have gone to federal buildings that were under the control of DOJ and tried to get in and ask questions and been told no by weird private security people wearing like face masks. And they didn't get what they wanted.
Anybody who works in any branch of government, state, local, federal, county, anything that wears a mask and refuses to be identified should be shot on sight. I'm sorry. This is not Soviet Russia.
It's anathema to how things work here. I mean, I'm not a big, law enforcement guy. I never have been. It's not my thing. I'm not a big fan. But even the most podunk, mouth breathing red state police department, some, whatever in Arkansas
like my sheriff's
or something.
office.
They wear badges with names and numbers, and you can identify them and you can call their boss. The idea that under this administration, ICE, which sometimes seems like they literally went to like a Home Depot in Biloxi and threw them in the back of a minivan and then gave them face masks and threw them into, Worcester, Mass to just grab people on the street. Like, that is not how we do things here. Anyway, that's another. So there's a really great Substack called Zeteo that I follow, and they have this thing that is a weekly update on the slide to authoritarianism, and they have Zeteo, and they have, and it is very comprehensive, and they cover a lot of stories. And it's stuff like that, little stories here and there and big stories. And it's day by day. It's like last week on Monday, here's what happened. Here's on Tuesday. And it is very comprehensive. And if you want to pay attention to this stuff, it's a great resource. We don't cover that because we're really focused on LGBTQ news, but you should pay attention to that stuff too. Anyway, Democratic senators, good on you. And good on Pedro Pascal. Tell me about what this handsome man, who is very handsome, so if you don't know who he is because you've been living under a rock, he is a very handsome man who's an actor. Anyway, what did he do?
He is speaking out strongly against author J.K. Rowling, and who wouldn't in their right mind, for her continued anti-trans comments, of course. Pascal tells Variety Fair that he called Rowling out on social media because, in his words, bullies make me sick. Me too. Well, Rowling recently celebrated a UK Supreme Court decision preventing trans women from being legally recognized as women. And so he called Rowling's reaction, quote, disgusting and, quote, heinous. He says that the backlash afterward made him question if his stance was helpful, but he emphasizes protecting trans people from bullying is crucial. He's a vocal advocate for trans rights, and he supports his sister, Lux Pascal, a trans actress and activist. Lux praised her brother for openly embracing his values, calling him fabulous and refreshing for wearing his humanity publicly. Pedro Pascal says that his aim is simply to help vulnerable communities live free from bullying and fear, adding that everyone deserves the right to exist. Imagine that.
Yeah. I'm glad that he did that.
Yeah, I am too. I'm happy when any of these people who have, the ability to reach the public in mass are not afraid to, make it be heard.
Yeah, absolutely. So good on Pedro Pascal, and boo on J.K. Rowling, and boo on the UK Supreme Court. And I've seen a lot of coverage in social media of folks. The UK is kind of in a sort of a moment that's kind of like ours. They had that study, and I forget the name of it, that was basically came out against gender-affirming care and was based on discredited studies and didn't take into account a lot of studies that were supportive and discounted them for no good reason. So the UK, for its own reasons, is really having another moment much like ours. So good on Pedro.
You know who also is on the sinners list again?
Mm-hmm.
As though she ever got off of it. But it's that idiot that runs Homeland Security, Secretary Kristi Noem. She is again under fire after telling Congress that it's not her responsibility to confirm if a gay asylum seeker that she sent to an infamous El Salvador prison camp is still alive. California Congressman Robert Garcia, who has actually been here in Palm Springs working with us on some of the public events that we've done with the Riverside County Democratic Party, he confronted Noem about Venezuelan hairdresser Andre Hernandez Romero, who legally sought U.S. asylum last year to escape anti-LGBTQ violence, and despite credible threats against him, Hernandez Romero was forcibly removed in shackles and sent to El Salvador's Sicot facility. That's, where all those guys were taken in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
and it's known, of course, for its inmate abuse. Garcia asked Nome simply to verify his safety, and she refused, calling the matter outside of her quote-unquote jurisdiction. Video from CCOT, the prison, previously showed Hernandez Romero being physically abused as he pleaded his innocence, and human rights advocates say the evidence against him was fabricated by a discredited former officer working at a private U.S. detention center. Hernandez Romero's family remains desperate for answers, but Nome insists that it's El Salvador's responsibility and not hers, except that she's a cunt.
So this story and the stories like it are some of the most heinous that are happening under this administration, because they are playing a child's game. They're playing a kindergartner's game, because this administration, including in press conferences, the president himself has been asked point blank about folks like Andre Hernandez Romero, and has said, we can't do anything about it. They're in El Salvador now. It's El Salvador's, it's their decision.
That BS was turned upside down when the young man who was taken from, was it Maryland or from Delaware that they took down there, and who never should have been deported either, and who a judge told them not to. And somehow he's managed to make it back onto U.S. soil. He's in detention, but, at least he's back here now.
Right. And they said he never would come back. And they're still saying that he's never going to stay here, but which isn't really their decision. It's the court's decision. But no, they say the president and Kristi Noem have said it's not ours. It's El Salvador now. It's their deal. El Salvador's douchebag autocrat, rock star chainsaw president has said, it's not our deal. It's up to the U.S. So they're playing this rope-a-dope game, meanwhile keeping innocent people in miserable conditions in a hellscape concentration camp prison. Kristi Noem and Tom Homan and Stephen Miller, I have a little list in my head of people who just, we're going to have hopefully, at some point, we're going to have our version of the Nuremberg trials. And these people will be sitting in judgment for their crimes against humanity and their crimes against the Constitution and federal law and humanity and everything. So Kristi Noem, I have to say, when I traveled recently to Puerto Vallarta, and I was both on my way there in the line for Homeland Security and on my way back, there are TV screens and they have videos on those screens, and it has her fucking video on it looking like, whatever, like you put Elvira through the dishwasher. It's the most heinous person with her stupid eye makeup and just her witchy, horrible face presiding over the TSA line. There were people in line behind me and in front of me that were also, they literally were like talking about how gross it was that we had to see her fucking face waiting to go through that the indignity of the x-ray and the scan where you have to stand with your hands up. Fuck her. I'm sorry. This is an administration where the buck stops here literally is not a phrase. There's no buck stops here. The buck stops somewhere else always. And in fact, it's a laugh line, because when the economy is good, Trump says it's Trump's economy. When there's any indicator that goes bad, Trump says, well, that's Biden's economy. He does this on a day-by-day basis. There's no buck stops here. There's no I made a mistake. It is literally, we are governed by a child and a bunch of cretinous villains who are babysitting the child, one of whom is Kristi Noem. Another one of whom is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
His name's not Robert F. Kennedy Jr., it's Retard F. Kennedy Jr.
Whatever his given name or maybe, he is the current health secretary, and he is causing controversy after making startling and completely unbased claims about teenage testosterone levels on Fox News. Speaking with host Jesse Waters, who is one of the most unscrupulous idiots on TV maybe ever. I mean, Jesse Waters makes Tucker Carlson seem like Walter Cronkite. He is just a piece of work.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's on that show, and Kennedy insisted that American teenagers today have lower testosterone than 68-year-old men, blaming food dyes and obesity. Waters appeared visibly stunned, asking Kennedy to repeat the claim, which Kennedy did without providing evidence, because there's probably none. There's none. Experts note that recent studies do to show declining sperm counts worldwide. Sperm counts. That's not testosterone. Sperm counts. Those are different things. But there's no scientific support for Kennedy's dramatic statement comparing teenagers directly to elderly men. Social media erupted. Actually, before I continue, I remember when I was a kid and I was in the car with my mom listening to KGO radio, and there was some kook on there, some doctor, and I forget his name now. And he was railing about declining sperm counts. And this is like in the late 80s. He's talking about sperm counts and like frogs where their penises are smaller. Like this is a bugaboo of the right for like forever. Like they think that like basically like since women started burning bras that like men's dicks are like falling off. Like so anyway, this is kind of realm of stupidity.
Married to Lorena Bobbitt.
Yeah. So anyway, we commented, RFK Jr. is out here worried about young boys' testosterone and sperm counts. It's wild how conservatives' accusations about liberals often reflect their own obsessions. Kennedy has offered no data backing his claim, leaving many folks, even conservative host Waters, in disbelief.
Well, if you get your news from Fox, I mean, what can you say?
Yeah.
On any story.
Is pretty wild. I mean, another, so I mentioned earlier the Great Leap Forward as something to look into as sort of where we're headed. Another thing to look into with someone like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is if you haven't seen the movie Dr. Strangelove, watch that, because this kind of fluoride in the water stuff is very Dr. Strangelove. So, and Dr. Strangelove isn't
I can't stand to watch any coverage with him because, I mean, the idea that he knows anything about anything when he can't even get a sentence out, without tripping all over himself.
Wait, RFK?
Yeah.
Junior? You mean like he looks like a piece of beef jerky that was left out in the sun for 20 years? That one?
Yeah. Well, at least we know that he still hits swimming holes with with
sewage in them.
Yeah.
So moving on to some state news, because we're just really running the gamut here tonight. But I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I know I am. And John, I hope you are too. Georgia, a state that is known for peaches and for sometimes being not the best politically. A Georgia librarian is speaking out after losing her job for displaying a children's book about a transgender child. Livonia Moore managed the Pierce County Library for 15 years. But was let go after a Christian activist group called the book inappropriate. The controversy began when Moore approved a volunteer-created display called When Aiden Became a Brother, a story about a family's acceptance of a transgender boy. The group, quote, Alliance for Faith and Family, campaigned online, urging followers to pressure local officials to remove the display. Library administrators quickly responded, terminating Moore's employment without prior warning. Moore, heartbroken, said she was simply doing her job, creating space for everyone in the community. She and her family are now seeking legal counsel. The library defended their decision, saying the display damaged community trust. Moore's supporters, meanwhile, are urging the public to contact local officials demanding justice for her sudden dismissal, creating space for everyone in the community. That's what she was doing. That's what librarians' jobs. A library.
Everyone. Now, come on, Richie. Let's be fair here. Everyone includes bigots.
Well, here's the thing. A public library should have space for everyone. Mm-hmm. And that includes bigots. Bigots are free to get bigot books off of their shelves. And the library probably has them. I bet the library has books by Tucker Carlson, by Bill O'Reilly, by Adolf Hitler, like Mein Kampf. I'm sure that book is on the shelf. I'm sure that books by Newt Gingrich are on the shelf. I'm sure there are plenty of books for bigots to read. There also are books for other people to read. That's not the issue here. I mean, the idea that she was, quote, damaging community trust. How would it be? Okay, tell me about this. Let's say that this was a library in a predominantly white town. Would it damage community trust to put a book of a James Baldwin book in the window? A Martin Luther King Jr. book in the window? Because it's mainly a white town. Is the community damaged by being exposed to things other than the majoritarian view? I mean, how about this? I mean, like, would it damage community trust for a librarian to make a display for July 4th that contained books by, let's see who would be an interesting choice? Hillary Clinton, a biography of Hillary Clinton, a biography of George W. Bush, maybe an MLK book, whatever. Would it damage community trust if it was a Republican or Democrat town and you put books from the other party in the window? This is stupid.
Yeah.
And the thing is, at the end of the day, this is, again, this long game that conservatives are playing. They don't like public education at all. They hate higher education because it makes people realize that being a blindered, small-minded, bigoted asshole isn't really it. And they don't like libraries because libraries are where you go to learn empathy, to learn creativity, to learn curiosity, and to scratch all those itches. So yeah, let's make the librarians so miserable that they leave. Let's defund libraries, which they are doing. Because, yeah, they win either way. Libraries are a threat, which is why librarians are badass bitches, by the way. And they have been stalwarts for years now against the onslaught of Christianists and homophobes and anti-women folk. Librarians have been brave. So,
by and large, yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us about our good friend Sarah McBride, who we've talked about before?
I do. She, of course, is the United States representative who serves from the state of Delaware, and she is also the first openly transgender member of the United States House of Representatives. And she says that declining public support for trans rights is due to losing the art of persuasion. Told that to Ezra Klein in a recent interview. The LGBTQ advocates mistakenly believed that equality victories like marriage meant ongoing progress was guaranteed. And she says that the movement moved too quickly for some Americans who were still learning the basics about transgender people, allowing misinformation to spread. McBride urges advocates to re-engage in open and patient conversations with the public rather than dismissing people who are not yet fully supportive. She also defends her decision not to publicly respond to hateful attacks from Republican colleagues, calling it a disciplined strategy. McBride emphasizes that real progress requires meeting people where they are, not alienating potential allies over single issues. And she says successful social movements always rely on dialogue, persuasion, and inclusion. Yes, to a point. There comes a point at which you just kind of have to throw a brick through the window, I'm afraid. That might not be her approach, but I'm getting tired of waiting for the world to catch up with things that we've already seen the sky not falling because people protected and defended the rights and the equality of all people.
John, we aren't always on the same page, but I'm on the same page. I am supportive of Sarah McBride's position, and I understand it for her, specifically for her responding specifically to her own colleagues. And I think that it is a great strategy. I think it's the winning strategy in that instance. I do not think it is the winning strategy in this moment. And I think it's naive to think it is. It's naive. I mean, like when I heard the words that you said, which were, I'm looking at the story here, which was engaging in, open patient conversations. Open patient conversations. Those are gone. Those are dead. We don't have open patient conversations about anything anymore.
Yeah, you're right.
And so I'm sorry to say that the idea, and I wish we did. I love discourse. I really do like honest conversations, but we are not in that moment anymore. We are in an entrenched moment of high dudgeon that is amplified by social media and by stratification because of what your feed tells you and all of the things and misinformation. Because again, the free market of ideas turns out, if you look at cognitive science, to not be a real thing, because lies that are exciting anchor cognitively better than truths, which is why we're in the moment that we're at, because people who peddle beguiling lies get people attached to them, and getting them disentangled from that by actual boring truth is extremely hard. And so the idea that we'd have an open, patient conversation, there are people in this country right now that listen to Fox News and truly believe that there are teachers in K through 12 schools who are putting cat boxes in their classrooms so that the kids who identify as cats can take a poo in the cat box. They believe that. This is not time for open, patient conversations with those people. Like you said, it's a brick. So Sarah McBride, I love you, and I'm glad that you are standing strong and doing your thing, but I'm sorry, I don't think that your idea of cutting through this media moment is gonna work. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If you think otherwise, this is just a little quick moment. If you think otherwise, if you agree with Sarah and you think that we should have open, patient, quiet, generous conversations with MAGA people who literally are wearing their hate hats to Disney to try to trigger people into crying, you can reach us at info@richieandjohn.com. That's a great way to reach us. Let us know that you agree with Sarah McBride, that you think that that's a great way to deal with fascists. Or you can reach us for any other reason. We'd love to hear from you about any and all of these topics. Our goal, I think, we've taken this little break to get HQ settled. And I think I can speak for the both of us that our goal in the coming months is to really double down on getting folks engaged with the show, getting great interviews, getting listeners to weigh in, and to just make this sort of a place where you feel like you can weigh in, and we would love to engage with you.
Yeah, we would. And we would love to hear from you about ideas for people you think that we should have on this program. We're starting to really book up our calendar for this second half of 2025, and as we move towards closer and closer to authoritarian rule, we don't want to leave stones unturned. So if there's things that you're seeing and hearing about in your community or around you, stuff that you hear on the news that you don't understand, things that could be better explained by others who are experts in certain areas, be sure to drop us a line, because we can't necessarily think about it all as much as we try and keep an open mind to all the different possibilities that are out there. I know that we were supposed to have been joined this past weekend by Kathy Renna, and work at the National Lesbian, Gay, Bi, Trans Task Force kept her from being able to make it, but she's going to be here sometime in the next few weeks. She is wanting to reschedule. And we've got some really cool people coming up on the show as well that we've promised in the past to bring. Among them, I'm looking forward to us having Del Shores, who of course was one of the writers of Queer as Folk when it was on Showtime television. And of course, he is the man behind the plays and and the films that Southern Baptist Sissies and
Sorted Lives. Yeah.
Sorted Lives and those shows. So looking forward to having them or him come back and join us as well. So please let us know what you'd like to hear, and we will do our best to make it happen.
So thank you for sticking with us on this extra long episode of Newsday Tuesday. We had a lot to cover. There was a lot of stuff we didn't even get to, which we may get to in the future. And in the future, we will try to start also building out our blog and stuff so that stories that we come across that we can't touch upon on Tuesday, we can get to you in other ways. But in the meantime, have a great week. We will get back to you on Substantial Saturday. And until then, stay cool, John, and we will talk to you soon.
All right. You be well.
Richie and John is a production of the Mutual Broadcasting System. Opinions expressed are those of the hosts and their guests. If you have a problem with it, bugger off.
Freedom and equality, let it be clear. Being who you are, fun, frisky, and out loud queer. From Mutual Broadcasting, we're breaking free. Living our truth, just you listen and see. Living our truth, just you listen and see.